Well, for more on the opening of the DNC in Chicago, we can bring in Mitchell Robertson, a fellow at the Rothermere American Institute at the University of Oxford in the UK. Thank you very much indeed for being with us here on France 24 this morning. Biden, of course, we shouldn't forget, was forced out of the presidential race by his own party over concerns about his age, his vitality. What sort of performance did he give on Monday night?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I mean, I think he gave a really good performance. I think this is right in his element. This was Monday night was all about Joe Biden. It was a crowd that was eating it up with "We Love Joe" signs. I think he did a really good job. It may not have been enough to convince them that this guy should have been our nominee, but I think it was a really nice end in some ways to Joe Biden's political career.
And Biden did speak about Trump rather explicitly on a number of occasions, perhaps in contrast to the way he's talked about his political rival in the past. Was that a clear decision on Biden's part, do you think?
I think so. I mean, he would have been given, I think this was part of the deal, when he left the presidency, he was given a large amount of discretion about what he could do this evening. And he gave a speech that, as you say, in some ways reminiscent of what we've heard from the president. But also it allows him, I mean, what happens with these conventions is different people play different roles. And so Harris, I think, will be looking to play more the unity role and the sort of I'm for all Americans. Joe Biden, now that he's no longer on the ticket, can be a bit more forceful about former President Trump.
And this also acted as a sort of swan song, didn't it? This was a chance for Biden in front of the Democratic faithful and the world to really go over his achievements in office.
Absolutely. It reminded me this is in some way a feature of these of the American political conventions. I was thinking of Ted Kennedy, the last big member of the three Kennedy brothers, his farewell at the 2008 Democratic Convention, a sort of way that we can put these tussles behind us and say thank you for your service. This was what this was about last night. I don't think there would be too many delegates wishing they'd made a different decision, but just to say to President Biden, thank you very much. And then over the next 3 nights, we look forward to the future.
And there were, of course, a lot of references, unsurprisingly, to Kamala Harris, a lot of references to Kamala and I, us, we. This was a speech very much intended to cement Kamala Harris as his natural heir. Would you agree?
Absolutely, completely agree. There was a lot of Kamala and I. Also, that he directly addressed, there's been some reports in the media saying that, he's not been happy with Pelosi and other people who suggested very firmly that he stepped down. In fact, he addressed those head on and said, look, I'm happy with this and I'm very happy to endorse Kamala Harris as a successor. I think people would have been watching very closely. These speeches have been analysed very closely if he hadn't done that. But he fulfilled the role that was required of him last night for the Harris team.
And we are, of course, just one day into this national convention. I want to talk for a moment about the enormous Gaza protests that we've already seen and we're expecting to see throughout the event until Kamala Harris's closing address on Thursday night. Do we think these protests are going to expose deeper rifts within the Democrats over the next few days?
Yeah. Well, the great historical analogy here with the convention being held in Chicago is back to 1968. Now, that was slightly stronger perhaps a month ago when what happened in 1968, Lyndon Johnson stood down from the presidency under duress in some ways like Joe Biden. And then the second part of that the myth, the sort of legend of 1968 were these huge protests about the Vietnam War outside the convention that turned violent and really derailed the campaign. Now, that's what some people suggested we may see with these Gaza protests. I think we'll just really have to wait and see what goes on outside the convention, what goes inside the convention about policy change as well. But we really will know that over the next 4 days. But it really is something to keep a close eye on.
And I think it's fair to say that Kamala Harris's nomination has injected the Democratic Party, this campaign, with new life, certainly a lot of excitement for people observing the campaign, people like ourselves. Do you think she can keep that up?
I mean, this is a really interesting campaign because it is a sprint, much more like a British or Australian kind of election where she was on the ticket for about 100 days. And so I think it's a lot easier to maintain that momentum over 100 days rather than really Donald Trump has been the presumptive Republican nominee for 4 years. And he's been having enthusiasm as well amongst his crowds, don't get me wrong. But I think this is a really interesting campaign to see this enthusiasm and see how it catalyses over the next 3 days when we really lock in some of those key policies and also some of the key messages that we're likely to see in the next couple of months in the run-up to the election.
Mitchell Robertson, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much for speaking to us today. Mitchell Robertson, fellow at the Rothermere American Institute at the University of Oxford. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.